Howdy, howdy.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
I did not. What happened?
I did. So this is our second high profile 9th round super major that just ends on turn 1 in the finals in what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. When was the LGT? Yeah, so we're getting into a pattern, and the pattern is not pretty. At least this one, it was the entire turn 1. Sean Dayton went first, and he took his whole turn, and then he got shot off the table by orcs. But that's not significantly better than just going second and losing immediately. It's ugly. Yes, the go first win rate has gone down a bit because of that, I guess. Oh man. What were you saying, Kevin?
It kind of supports two ideas. One being that people are only playing out full games because it turns out tiebreakers matter. So it turns out that people are actually unhappy with getting shot off the table so much that when they don't have to, aka it's the final round, play out the rest of the game. Once they already know they've lost, they're done. If that were literally the previous round, he probably would have played it out just to make sure he got third or whatever.
Yeah, people probably shouldn't be talking out games, though. So most judges nowadays are trying to get people to finish their games, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit.
Right. I'm not saying they're going to talk out their games. I'm saying people.
That's what Chris was saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying people are willing to play out games just because your early rounds and your tiebreakers matter, even if any of the previous rounds were like that. People. Oftentimes, tournaments can make people feel bad because they feel like they have to continue playing a game that they've already lost. This kind of proves that when there's no reason to continue playing, people are far more willing to concede.
Yeah, it kind of also really pushes on the whole playing out games and having points matter for win losses being kind of unappealing. But Warhammer games take a long time, so it's not great workarounds for that. So you kind of just gotta figure that out.
It also kind of supports the idea that while Drakari do have an obscene win rate and they are a little bit too efficient, I feel like what orcs are doing, what Admech are doing are worse, where it feels bad. It's just you don't feel like you're playing a game. At least even when Drakari beats you, even if they're 70% to beat you, you still probably play 4 turns of that game before you realize it's over.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I've played against Drakari even before the first time they were nerfed when Raiders were 20 points. And it was gross. I was wildly overwhelmed. But I played 5 turns. I had a full game. I definitely felt like I learned lessons from that game. Orcs, last time I played against orcs, what's the lesson I learned? I learned that orcs can table you in 2 turns. There's not lessons to be learned. You just get shot off the table. And it's also way less interesting. Yeah, Dark Eldar, you're going to lose, but it's a much more interesting game of trying to figure out how to scrape together points against this mobile fragile army that you're still allowed to kill stuff against. orcs to just table you in 3 turns. Like, you're actually, like, they didn't finish the game there, but, like, I think that on turn 2, Sean would have had no models left on the table. Like, turn 2, tables. And that's not an okay state for
Agree.
them. Which is, like, yeah, Dark Eldar are the better army, but they're winning in a much less egregious way. Like, they're just winning by being hyper efficient at scoring points, and orcs are winning by just actually pushing people off the table. AdMech are interesting because the Boogeyman AdMech list was sort of shooting people off the table, and now it's sort of this amalgamation of a bunch of like forward deploying, like charging guys who prevent you from preventing you from scoring and some shooting. So they're definitely too good at all of that, and they're tilted towards shooting you off the table. But like, there is at least a game to be played against AdMech. But the orc version just feels disgusting because they have one game plan and it's table you immediately. But both orcs and AdMech like shoot you off the table style lists. They just need to go. Like, GW needs to figure out how to balance the ridiculousness that is like the airplanes and the indirect fire from orcs, because like a lot of tournaments are trying to fix the problem with orcs or with like the shooting AdMech lists by just making terrain ridiculous. And all the best orc lists don't care about terrain. Like, it's just a bunch of buggies and airplanes. And like, yeah, they'll bring some scrapjets because scrapjets direct fire is ridiculous. But they'll bring just enough scrapjets to cover whatever few fire lanes exist, and the rest of their army doesn't actually care about line of sight.
Yeah. Special guest. Oh,
I mean, I don't even think that's like the right solution though, right? Because we're just going back to like what happened at the end of 8th edition when flyers were busted. GW like changed some airplane rules to like make them a lot worse at scoring points. They changed the way you take them, so it's hard to put them in your army, and then they nerfed them all. And then these new books came out, and they just produced these flyers that have like 4 to 5 times the fire. I'm not even exaggerating. A Wazbon Blasha has actually 5 times the firepower of a Crimson Hunter Exarch, and it's like, GW, what are you doing?
yeah.
And they're just producing these airplanes that have wildly more firepower and killing potential than these other airplanes. With also, they're also tougher. Like, Wazon Blastjet is somehow tougher than a Crimson Hunter Exarch now, because they have the invulnerable save. They're ramshackle. They have higher toughness. Like, they're just all better. Like, I don't get it. So I don't even think it's like you need to restrict flyers, because like, I don't know if my elder opponent was like, I want to bring a Crimson Hunter Exarch, like, cool. I want to bring 3 Crimson Hunter Exarchs. Like, that's also fine. It's the actual data sheet. Like, the data sheets are just a problem. They should never have been printed.
I mean, there's a point cost that they could have been reasonable at. That's
fair. Like, you could just point them out of playability. They're already squishy for their point cost. It's just how hard they hit you. Like, at some point, you just can't spend 280 points on something that has 10 wounds. But like, I'd be kind of okay if they just pointed them all out of the game. Like, but orc players will then be sad because the models are sweet and they should be playable in some form. But like, you can't have 3d6 las cannons on your thing that ignores line of sight.
I think another problem with the orc book is they don't have interesting stratagems, so them taking a bunch of detachments to get all these slots isn't actually a cost for them. Like, all of what makes orc good is in their stat sheet efficiency. A lot of other books, like even though AdMech were too good, there was like, you'd hear AdMech players talk about like taking relics and warlord traits, like, oh man, this warlord trait's really good, but I need these command points for actually playing the game. And there was some tension there. Or it's just like they printed so bad of stratagems, but so efficient stat lines. Just like, yeah, take 3 patrols. Why? There isn't actually a CP cost because you don't care about your CP.
Yeah, like, I think if we're just like, 1 plane per detachment, like orc lists are usually running 4 planes, I'm like, all right, I guess we'll just run 3. Like, I don't know that they lose that much by bringing the 3rd patrol.
Yeah. Special guest, what are your thoughts?
I think that Ezra Wolvek continues his fantastic ploy of making people put out increasingly more egregious codexes, allowing the Dark Eldar to sneakily get away with having the best win percentage, and least likely to face any serious nerfs compared to the other two. It's a fascinating situation to find yourself in when you're looking at these things and you're looking at the actual points cost, or not the points cost, you're looking at the actual win percentages. And the fact that people would rather play against Dark Eldar and lose, but at least it's a game, even though it was truly a game. Like, that's a very interesting point to be made. The fact of the matter is that, like, even if the AdMech lists and the Orc lists put up worse win percentages, it's such a negative play experience that they would rather hammer those into the ground and let Drukhari do their thing.
So two things, real quick, Chris. Chat's saying they can't hear you, so see if you can figure out what's going on there. And second of all, I think also to respond to you, Burns, I think it matters a lot, like what you're trying to get out of the game. Like, if the thing you want to get out of the game is you want to win games, then I'd rather play against an Orc list and just hope to win my coin flip. And if I'm playing a shooty list, I can take some airplanes out of the sky and like have a real game. I'm playing the game to like try to get better at the game, to learn, to like master my army and pick up more skills. In which case, I'd rather play against Dark Eldar, because the Orc, like playing against the Orc list, like, yeah, all right, I win the coin flip. I know I just have to kill all the airplanes, do that to my very best ability, and hopefully not get tabled, like make some invulnerable saves. Like, that's not interesting, because the way they attack you, they don't care about line of sight, and the things that do care about line of sight move so fast or teleport. Like the list that won was a bunch of airplanes and a bunch of shock jump trashes, and then like some squig buggies. So everything either teleported, was a flyer, or didn't need to see you. So where I put my models on the table is kind of abstract. I could just kind of like put them on the side and just be like, just roll at them and I'll make some armor saves, because it doesn't matter where they are. You can just hit them. Everything teleports or just sees them or shoots across the table. Like, it doesn't matter. And I can put them behind the train. I can put them in the middle of the table. Like, whatever. Just like, I'll make your saves and we can play this game without ever deploying models. And that's awful. That's really, really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, we can hear you. All right. Well, Chris figures that out. Kevin, you got any thoughts on that?
Crap. I had a thought, and then you asked me if I had a thought, and it was gone.
I can bounce one around.
Sure.
So with the Orc Codex being the way it is, with competitive play being the way it is, are we at a level where with Black Templar Codex on horizon, I mean, it's already out, but the official release is still yet to be announced and all that fun stuff. Like, does this change the competitive meta at all, or is the shooty Orc list just so overwhelming that like it is unlikely that anything coming out would change that until something is done by GW?
So Dark Eldar still has a reasonable matchup into that list. Just Sean Naden's particular version of the list is very bad against that, because he's got a bunch of poison weapons that just like can't airplane. But the Orc list is still very good, and I think more importantly, it's just super unhealthy. Like, I don't want to go to tournaments if I know, like, this is like a 12-man tournament and there's 3 Orc players, I don't want to go. Like, I don't want to go. It's not interesting. Yeah. And I think that's really bad for the game.
Actually, you know what? That reminds me. I should look at the player roster for the RTT and Saugus and see if I want to go to that this weekend.
Yeah, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know these 4 guys. They play Orcs. And it's not like they're bad people. I like all of the Orc players in my life. I just don't like the list that they're currently forced to play. It's not interesting.
I remember the point I wanted to make. So you were arguing earlier that it doesn't produce interesting gameplay. You don't learn anything from playing against Orcs. I think there's like even a worse thing about Orcs. It's like some people play 40k to kind of show up and shoot and kill models at each other, and just like that is their definition of a good time. It doesn't matter if they win or lose. They just they want their models to do things. And I showed up to a casual combat patrol like a month and a half ago now, and I played against Orcs, and I was playing Space Marines. I was intentionally bringing a bad Space Marine list because it was a very casual event, and he brought like a very good Orc list, and I was down to 2 characters who were standing behind 2 impulsors with full squads inside of it. That was it. He shot literally everything else except for the 2 characters just because he couldn't declare them. He had enough shots. The infantry were overkilled. It's just, that was the game that I was playing. I'm just like, well, I guess I'm going to put up my models, and like, I spent 40 minutes driving here. I played for 20 minutes. I guess I'm going to spend 40 minutes driving back. This was my experience that I was excited for.
Yeah. All right, not to just harp on this forever. What's the fix? Like, how do you fix this situation? Because The other concern, right, is that if you just go, all right, like just nerf the airplanes and the problematic buggies into oblivion, well, like the orc stratagems are all bad and the infantry's like reasonable. There's nothing wrong with the orc infantry data sheets, except that most other infantry data sheets have a bunch of sweet stratagems behind them, and the orc ones don't. So you can't just be like, oh, the airplanes and the buggies are unplayable. So what's the fix? How do you and I mean, Admech and Drakari also need to get toned down first, but or rather as well. But I think orcs are the thing that like makes ornaments not fun. Like I have an incredible amount of not fun losing to those shitty orc lists.
So, dare I say, nerf those things, and even if it might make them too good, I wouldn't mind cutting a point off the infantry because it makes all the infantry, because it makes orcs very similar to Drakari, where they have efficient infantry, but you actually get to kill infantry. So even if that still makes them good, it makes them good in the way that people like Drakari being good.
Okay, I'll answer. And then if it's too good, you can later on tone it down some more later. But just like put what 10 to 15 points in every buggy.
That and like, yeah, boys, Prima boys, or whatever their names are. You can
Beast
drop
Boys.
them. Beast boys. You can drop them a point.
Cool.
I think we have talked this part to death a little bit. Let's get on to the main topic. So,
All right.
Ben, I know a little bit ago you did something. You were supposed to be a support judge, right? And
Yeah.
that's what you did, right?
Yeah, no. So I think everyone knows at this point. A couple weeks ago, Battle for Salvation held their what was normally an annual tournament. Due to COVID, it hasn't been quite exactly annual. But they got to start it back up again this year. And I was asked by a friend and through the head of the BFS organization to help them rules judge, because it's like an 80+ person event, and they basically had one judge for rules. BFS had a couple people who were like, oh, well, we can like be on the floor and like try to help answer basic questions, but we want a couple like higher rules knowledge people to like answer complicated questions. And I said, sure, I'll that sounds like fun. I'll go out there and do that. So we drove up and we got there. I met everyone. Or no, I apologize. I didn't meet everyone. We had dinner. I talked to the person who's be the head judge. Well, I drove up with the head judge because we're all friends. We live fairly close to each other. Wake up the morning of, I go to breakfast, and my teammate Dan comes out and goes, "All right, you're in for it. Head judge is sick. You're in charge." And also the other guy who was gonna like swing by and help out, yeah, he got called into work. So you're on your own for now. So I was the head judge for BFS, which was a unexpected and wild experience, but I had a lot of fun. It was really good.
So pausing you there, Burns, you go to help at a GT, and all of a sudden become the head judge at a GT. How would you react? GT.
It'd be a great time to find a hole to jump into. Just to give it a frame of reference, a GT for Magic the Gathering just is like hundreds of players. We're looking like we're going way above and beyond in terms of organizational outreach. But just an incredible confluence of events for you, Ben. Really, it was fantastic. I'm sure the TO was singing your praises as you accepted the position and then just like ran screaming out of the building.
Yeah, it was quite the event. I kind of show up and they're just like, all right, you're in charge. Like, any rules announcements you want to make to everyone? So there were some things I would have liked to have been in charge of had I known I was going to be the head judge. Like I would have been like, hey, can you just like direct all the emails for model conversions to me? But instead we just like had a file of like, these are the things we've approved, and like, man, I hope the people who were in charge of that were like, well, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Also, I don't like know what's approved or what's not, so whatever. I'm just not going to worry about it. And of course, there's also like weird rules things are like people don't know, or how's terrain going to be ruled. Like I was not super familiar with the terrain packet because I had only been asked a couple weeks ago, and I looked at the terrain packet, but I hadn't like committed every keyword in the terrain packet to memory. And there were a couple ones that were a little odd. But that's all minor stuff. The only other one was chess clocks. They did not want to put every table on chess clock. We didn't have enough chess clocks for every table. which if I, was able to just do whatever I wanted no matter what, I would just be like, all right, every table plays on chess clock every round, no matter what. I don't care what your opinions are. Just because that just makes everything fair for everyone. But that's all right. So round one was honestly the craziest round because I was the only person for 2 different rooms with 40 people each. There was a stream table with 2 people who knew their own armies fairly well, but had never played against the opposite army. So I got lots of questions from them like, wait, is these 2 rules interact the way it was orcs versus sisters? So not just 2 armies, like 2 complicated armies. So great. So I got hit with all of the classics, like, do freebooters think? Can freebooters stack with themselves? Can sisters double shoot cherubs? Can you get out of Rhino and shoot with Argent Shroud? How do miracle dice work? Help. Yeah, it was great. So that was kind of wild round one. I did a lot of running. I was like out of breath by the end of the round because I was just literally running back and forth between the convention hall trying to answer judge questions, train. And it's also, of course, it's round one. So everyone's like, wait, what's this training piece do? Like, what's this supposed to be? Judges, are the objectives in the right place? Like, because of course, for that mission, the objectives so a lot of the tables had been like things have been nudged. So objectives were like landing and train. So I had to adjust train on like 35 tables. It was ridiculous. Couple things that were immediately apparent. Something I already know, both as a teacher and as someone who's organized events before. No matter what you put in your rules packet, nobody will read it. No one. And 40K, unfortunately, is in a state right now where there are some rules that just don't have answers. Like, there's like, you do a thing, you're like, all right, what happens? And there's not a correct answer. The correct answer is like, ask the TO what they think, and there's a rules interpretation that they have to make. Fortunately, BFS is part of the New England 40K circuit, which most events in the area are, and there is a New England 40K FAQ, which is just says like, this is how New England 40K is going to rule these things that don't have real answers for them. Most of those things are in sisters and in orcs. There's some issues with certain warlord traits on squig bosses, and there's lots of questions about how does Argent Shroud work when they shoot multi-melters or get out of rhinos or want to use cherubs. And all that stuff's in there, and I got between round 1 and round 2, every single sisters player and half of their opponents asked me a question about how does this work. So that was great. Sisters is not necessarily the army that no one knows how they work, because I didn't get too many questions about like, this is a fundamental thing about sisters, how does this work? It was more like, there is no rule for this. What are we gonna like? How do we want to rule this?
An example?
All right, so can sisters, after sisters shoot, they can use with a retributor squad, they can use a cherub to shoot again. Can they use another one after that one? Maybe. Rules are kind of implied that they were trying to change the rule because they're worded very differently, but the new wording definitely lets you use 2. Fair number of other larger events have recently said you can only use 1, including some GW events, which means I had more than one sisters player, and many people who played against sisters show up very surprised that sisters were being allowed to use 2 cherubs at the same time. I had more than once. I had a couple sisters players get fairly upset that we were ruling it that way because they had brought lists with 1 cherub in every squad because they assumed they were going to get to fire the 1 cherub, and then that squad were, of course, immediately murdered because you have to kill a retributor. So just read your packets, people. If you're going to a big event, read the packet. If you're playing sisters and it's not clear how the judge is going to rule things, just like email them. Just be like, hey, how are sisters being ruled? Can I walk out of a rhino and shoot? Can I advance out of a rhino and shoot? How many cherubs can I shoot at this? And those questions weren't always asked, and that's hard. Like I don't know what, because at that point we're already like mid tournament. Like you've built the list, you submitted it, and then the really rough ones are like when their opponents are like, oh wait, last tournament I went to, the judge says they couldn't do that, and then I had to explain to them, well, that's not actually a rule anywhere saying if they can or can't. We did put in our rules packet that we'd allow them, but I can't really blame you for not reading the fine print at the bottom of our rules packet saying this is what we will and won't allow Sisters of Battle players to do because you're playing Dark Eldar. And it's probably okay. And like, so, but yeah, like they can, and I'm sorry for your raider. So that was interesting. I've been talking for a little bit. So how do you guys feel about that?
So my first thought is I don't know how much you've spoken about how many different armies you personally play and how many armies or how many players of armies you know personally as well that you've ingested a lot of their rules. Did you find that being somebody who's played half of the armies in 40k, or at least has a pretty good knowledge of half the armies of 40k, was like critical for being able to make those snapshot calls that people were asking for constantly?
I certainly was able to make a fair number of calls a lot faster than I would normally would. When people ask me questions like how do Cabal points work, I got that question a couple times because there were several Thousand Suns players and some of them were newer. And there are also, some people who just hadn't played against Thousand Suns because it's a fairly new book, and Cabal points are a nightmare. That rule is wildly complicated. And I'm very familiar with it because I play Thousand Suns. So so things like that were kind of nice to know well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The other thing that we had issues with for the whole event was players sticking airplane wings off the table. I can't even begin to describe how many players deployed airplanes with the wings off the table, flew airplanes around corners, and just like, oh, I need to see behind this rune, stick the nose over the rune. All right, well, your wing's like 4 inches off the table. I had to put so many airplanes back on the table. I actually even gave out a couple warnings for like next time you do that as a yellow card, because like people were just doing it over and over and over. And with like the current meta being orc flyers, and with the amount of terrain at BFS, this was like super important stuff. Because like you definitely get line of sight on things if you just stick your plane wings off the table that you could not normally get line of sight on. Like especially from like you could like measure line of sight from off the table if you stick your wing off the table. And like some people were doing that, which you like super can't do. And instead they had to like reposition their planes in places that were like legal for that to happen, which oftentimes ended up being like way closer to their opponent, and then those planes were subsequently killed in the next turn. So I round 2 I made an announcement. All right, hey everyone, add my players or players, like your wings need to be on the table. And after that it got a little bit better, but I still, even by like the J2 round 5, I was still correcting a couple people on like wings on the table. So all right, I'm gonna now talk about a couple things. I have some questions for you guys too now. Where obviously 40k is very different from Magic judging, which is what you're doing, Mike. In that, first of all, we're like hot fixing the game at the tournament level. Like tournament rulings are different, which is a complete mess. And so that right there is already like weird. And before I go any further, like how do you feel about that? I know you don't like it, but like, what's the solution, right?
No, I think you've made a perfectly reasonable argument about it. Yes, I do personally dislike it, but that's because the game that I had the judge in before a release would come out of new cards, maybe new abilities and all that, like new mechanics, there would be a document that came out from the organization of judges that would explain many of the interactions that may occur that you should be aware of when that comes out, so that judges don't have to normally make those kinds of snapshot calls. For Magic, they're not doing things like interpreting rules. They're doing things like fixing incorrect game states, right? And that's really what you ideally want to be doing in a game that has balance in it. So yeah, absolutely.
This kind of talks about the issue that the term FAQ has kind of lost its meaning in 40k. FAQs are supposed to be frequently asked questions. In theory, your frequently asked questions should be like coming out at the same time, or maybe within a week of your book coming out. For the actual like frequently asked questions, like I would consider the cherubs like a frequently asked question, because it was like anything that I could when I'm watching a video of someone streaming the book on the first day, and like a chat member is asking that, or the actual person playing the book is asking it, that's a frequently asked question. There's no way something that gets asked on day 1 is not a frequently asked question.
100%.
And we've had game designer or people that have belonged to the game development team for 9th edition also be like, well, we always intended to play it like this, but we can't, that wasn't ever like solidified anywhere until much later, or if at all. So that's just another example of how there's kind of a split between Games Workshop and its own design, like its own game balance efforts.
Yeah, for sure. And all right, so this is now where we get more into magic judging and like there's like magic judging, 40K judging, where in terms of like attitudes towards judging, and I got a couple of things here. So well, I'm gonna give you guys all the situation. So we're winding down to the end of round 3. There's an 0-2 table. There's like 20 minutes left, and then like finishing turn 3. So first of all, they haven't. When I announced to the guys, hey guys, like you got to tell me, are you done with this turn? Are you done with this turn? They haven't been telling me because they're end of turn 3 with 20 minutes left in the game. So like clearly, that didn't happen. I walk over and I'm like, all right guys, like I'm gonna put you guys in a chess clock, and they both look at me and they go, could we not? And as a 40K judge, that's fine. Like you guys are having fun. You're 0-2. Your game has zero impact on the integrity of the tournament in terms of like the top bracket. You're having fun, whatever, finish up your game in minutes. From a Magic perspective, that's like not even a question. Like a judge tells you to do something, it just happens. Like there's no like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, no, the judge told you to go on a clock, you're going on a clock. And if you ask it again, you're like getting consequences. And that's a difference. Like, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a culture thing. I think it just comes down to sort of what players expect from their different games. An official event for Magic the Gathering has kind of put it's so developed at this point that there's kind of a very specific ritual to it. You know, there's the opening meeting to the event. There's an announcement of the stand, like the round structure and the prize structure and all of that. Like it's all kind of built in so much that it would seem incredibly out of place for somebody to be like, no, just say no to a judge. It's just not what you do. Really, I think players look at it as sort of a contract when they agree to enter the tournament. Magic players just are more intrinsically understanding that like it is a two-way street. Like they have to follow a judge's dictates, and the judges are on their side going to enforce a good game, like a fair game environment.
It's on to you, Chris.
So my question is, like, not having played Magic basically ever, what, like, I get why in Ben's case, like the 0-2 table or whatever, like that game doesn't affect the outcome. So if they don't want to go on a clock, fine. So if somebody in like the mid tables at a Magic tournament like didn't like finish out their game or something similar, like what impact does that have on final standings of the event?
So in Magic, once you get to like the time the round has called, you take 5 extra turns, or at least that's what it was when I was playing Magic. Might have changed at this point, but you'd get 5 extra turns. After those 5 extra turns, your game would end. If there was no winner, it would just be a draw. So there was an artificial cap on how long the game could go. If you're one of the people past that point, there's enough judges generally to make sure they're watching you're not slow playing either. So like often these 5 turns wouldn't take more than 10 minutes. So it just slows down the event. But a game decision is often decided. And in Magic, it's not like 40K where there's points as tiebreakers. You win, you lose, or you draw. It didn't matter if you somehow 0-0 drawed or 1-1 drawed. A draw was a draw.
Okay.
Yeah, and not to say that like incidences like Ben's never happened. Obviously, as a Magic player myself, I have been in the most unfortunate of OX brackets where we are all kind of shuffled away at the end of the table, in the far side of the room, and we're all playing our games, and there's not as many judges around. Like there's a couple so that you can get things done, but obviously the judge, the sort of weight of the judges will flow towards the tables where they are more needed. So it's not like it's not like those kinds of situations don't happen where you have like the more casual / less important games being played, but they're still expected to maintain they're still expected to listen to the judges, of course.
All right, let me give you all a situation now, because in Magic, if you were a judge and you walk by a table and you hear someone do something wrong, you stop it and you fix it. And that's not always the expectation of 40K judges. And I did get a couple people who were surprised that I just was like, hang on, guys, you did that wrong. Fix it. Because a lot of players are just very used to, like, you play your game and the judge only comes over your table and fixes things when you call them. So I'm just gonna give a couple examples. So I'm walking by between like the upper bracket and lower bracket tables, and I hear I didn't know there at the time they were a Granite player. They're like, this is a super smite, D6 damage. Oh, a 1. All right, I'm gonna command point reroll that. You can't CP reroll anymore. There's a list. It's not on there. And I walked over and I just changed it. And they were both very nice about it. And he expressed annoyance that he had other people do that to him. So that's why he thought he could do it. So thoughts on that?
I'm of the opinion that as long as it's not too far gone, that's a-okay. Obviously, like, you discover that someone super smited round 1 and rerolled it into a 6. What was super smart is dead, and now it's 3 turns later. You can't wind that back.
Obviously, yeah, for sure.
Speaking to what Kevin had said last question about how in Magic things are just like win, loss, draw, and that's all that matters. There's not like a point system involved in that way. If you guys can just clarify for me if I get this wrong, but if two players are playing and they're using egregiously wrong rules, and so much so that like somebody has accrued an egregious number of points because of an incorrect rules understanding, that will affect the total standings, right? Because they gained so many rules, it's not like they just, not only did they win their game, but they could have possibly won it by so many points that it is like very difficult. It will simply not only affect their game, but it will affect all the games around them points wise. Is that true?
Yeah, for sure.
So for 40K, it's like it's a much more serious situation where even though the players themselves might not think like, oh, we might have played this wrong, but like it's between us and, we'll fix it ourselves and we don't have to get the judge involved. But this is like, no, you are not the only one affecting your game. Your game affects many other people.
All right. Yeah. All right. I'm actually going to skip ahead to, I'll go back to this topic because you've basically brought me to my hardest call of the entire weekend. So it's the end of day 1. So day 2, they get split into brackets, and a table calls me over that, they're not just like a table, they're a 2-0 table. So their game just is deciding who's going to the winner's bracket, who's going to the loser's bracket. And one of them goes, they walk over, I walk over to the table, I'm like, all right, guys, what's up? I'm like, well, and it's towards the end of the round. Like, all right, it's like turn 4, I'm conceding, but we've realized that my opponents, we've just like this terrain piece, we've just like not been playing it as obscuring the entire game. Because there were these like walls that they looked like walls, but the tournament packet were calling them obscuring, and we were ruling them as obscuring. And it turns out one of the players was firing indirect fire over them like the entire game. So they both, fortunately, to make my job easier, what's up? Sorry, I apologize. Not obscuring. Dense. Words are hard today. All right, so this dense. There's a wall that looks like it should be obscuring, but it's actually dense, which means you're -1 to hit if you shoot through it. And one of the players has been firing indirect over it the entire game because they hid like all their indirect stuff behind it. Because while it is not technically obscuring, it's also just a huge wall, so it like physically hides your stuff. And they go, "Oh, we just like didn't do it that way. What do we do?" And I had a bit. This was my call where I had like a disagreement with the rest of the TOs. The rest of because they said I'm the judge. I get to make the decision. But basically they said, well, both the players agreed to it because they talked about terrain. They both agreed to it, so you just leave it. And I said, well, actually, the winning player took a secondary that was based on killing models, and because points matter, that means they have scored more points than they should have. So I penalized them on points. I took points away from grind them down, which is secondary where you have to get kills, because it's not as egregious. Like both players made a mistake, and that mistake caused the game to be higher scoring. and that is an advantage. Now this isn't like, and I've made this mistake before too. I've gone to a tournament and I played a hold 1, a hold 2, hold 3 as a hold 1, hold 2, and that's a mistake. I've messed up the tournament. I should be penalized points. And so I took some points off of them because it was also they were a winning bracket. They were going to go into the finals, and at some point, someone in there could be in contention for second or third, and the 6 to 9 points they scored from firing over this dense piece of terrain is going to really matter. I don't know, like the more egregious version would be like 2 people show up to a table and they just play the wrong mission. They play like, I don't know, is the mission supposed to be the scouring, and they play retrieval instead, which is like a way higher scoring mission. And like, yeah, you made a mistake. I'm going to keep the win-loss because you both did the win-loss, but I can't give you all those points because that's not fair to everyone else. And that was easily my hardest call of the whole event. So what do you guys think about that?
How do you decide like how many points to take off?
Yeah, that's that was my thing where it's like, and I honestly think it would have been only like, I think it was striking them down. They probably only would have missed it once, but they did make a mistake, so I took it off of them 2 times. So I took 6 points off them.
Yeah, because I mean, like it's obvious that like, yeah, they can't have all of the points because it just doesn't work out that way. But how much is too much? How much is enough? How much is fair? That's I can definitely see why that would be a very difficult call to make.
Yeah, right. And there's definitely a school of thought where like there is no amount that's too much. They made a mistake. They should be punished. I'm not there. I'm on like, we should try and bring this back to as close as fair as possible, erring on the side of like more punishing for the players who made a mistake, but not to the point where it's like, all right, you win with 1 point. Haha, like that's ridiculous. So I'm pretty happy with the call I made, but I agree. It's like, how much do you take off? Because 0 is also definitely not the right number. I don't think you can just be like, yeah, walk away with your points, because that's a disaster waiting to happen. Yeah.
There's certainly something to be said about in terms of like, I know you were saying like you penalize them points, but really at some point you were trying to you were trying to recreate the game state, like an honest game state. It's not like you were penalizing them for being incorrect. You were simply trying to figure out what would they have actually gotten if they had been playing correctly. And then on top of that, you were trying to think of what's the appropriate penalization for this. And yeah, I think it's a super difficult choice. It's one that Magic judges very often didn't get to make. Rewinding the game state, trying to fix the game state is something that's very difficult because there are just like so many factors involved. And so oftentimes they'd go straight to penalizing the players, game losses, match losses, if things continued. They like, in the end, I think the organization just decided that like it was a lot easier to go to sort of a player penalty versus trying to factor every possible variable that could have happened there to fix it.
Yeah, and when I'm trying to fix something, I kind of have 2 things happening at the same time. I have, all right, how do I fix the game state? And that's separate from player punishment. Like, I just want to like get the game state to be the right place, and there's actual player punishment. And I did hand out a warning for this. Basically, I told the player, the next time you miss dense terrain, you're getting a yellow card. And then they never missed dense terrain again, so it didn't matter. So there's the penalty part, which penalties I find to be a little bit easier. It's more the fixes that are like really hard. Like, how do you fix that?
Yeah. And I certainly think that Magic was able to move sort of away from fixing the game state and to player correction because points weren't such a thing, right? In the end, they're kind of playing amongst each other.
Yeah. And yeah, real quick, chat just says, I thought indirect fire ignores line of sight, so they ignore dense terrain. And that's actually not true. That feels like it should be. But you actually still draw a line between your unit and their unit. If that line goes over dense terrain, you are -1 to hit. Oftentimes, one of the reasons that people miss dense terrain with their indirect fire so often isn't so much that they forget that indirect ignores dense, because it doesn't. It's just they don't draw the line. It's like the orc list I was talking about. It's like they kind of just get to roll their attacks against whatever, so they don't even like pick up a measuring tape. They just go, all right, my range is really far. You're in it. I'm shooting at you, and they don't even like look at what terrain they're going through because it usually doesn't matter. But dense does actually penalize you for indirect. All right, I'm gonna give you my disaster situation. I didn't get my disaster situation, which was great. I walk over to that same table and they go, all right, we've been firing through dents the entire time. And then the guy goes, yeah, I would have won otherwise. What do you do there? I have been thinking about that for days. And I still don't have the right answer, which is miserable because if that had happened, I would have had about, 5 minutes to figure it out.
So, so honestly, for me, I take a deep breath and I inform them that it's not just one player who maintains the game state. In the end, they also were playing the game. A game is two players that are cooperatively together on this, and they both failed to understand how line of sight terrain works. So yes, it is true that you may have won or lost or had some sort of different result, but in the end, you were party to this incorrect game state.
You know what? That's a good point, because when you're playing on chess clocks, one of the things that's clearly stated is that each player is responsible for their own time. So you can't blame the other player for forgetting to clock it over to them. And by that similarly, each player is responsible for tallying up scores for both players, and coming to an agreement at the end. So you're both responsible for the other player as well.
Yeah, and I should say that doesn't make the actual social interaction any better. They are still going to be pissed. And I shouldn't say oh, it's so easy to just tell a player that they're wrong, or that they were part of the problem. But when it comes to understanding the rules and understanding how you officiate these things, it is easier if you understand and that they understand that there's two people involved with these kinds of rule breaks.
Yeah, I think you were correct. I think that is yeah. If something got missed, now that one's easier for me. And I do think I would lean with you. I apologize. I didn't really give the full disaster situation. That one's bad, right? But I agree with you in that case. Yeah, you both messed up. Everyone should know how dense terrain works. What if one player gets one of their army rules wildly wrong? Oh yeah, my unit ignores the penalty for dense terrain. And then the other guy's all right. So, oh no, hang on. It's just the armor save that you don't get the bonus for because smartness, whatever. So it's well, now the other person is responsible for knowing their opponent's codex? Maybe not.
Yeah. So step one is you call another judge over to take the other player to the side so that you begin cheating and major sportsmanlike conduct infractions to see if this was something that might have been less than honest of a mistake. But then, it gets really ugly when you get to that point. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it comes down to Benzaria, did they have a guilty mind? Did they actually do it in maliciously, or maybe not maliciously, but at least intentionally misrepresenting their rules?
Yeah, but that's I don't know. Even on top of that, though, it's not it's if I'm playing Tau, right? I have smart missiles. They ignore. And Tau are a miserable example because they have multiple ways of ignoring cover, and some of them ignore dents, and some of them don't. And I forget because there's 3 different things in the book that let you ignore cover. The stratagem lets you ignore dents, and the other 2 don't. And I mix it up. I go, oh, smart missiles ignore dents for whatever reason. And I, do that for the whole game. That's not my opponent's fault. I have wildly misplayed my army. And to make life easier for the judge, if a judge came over to that table, I personally would concede because there's he should be winning and I should be punished because rule. But I think in 40K we kind of have to also have this second level on top of all right, you both messed up, which is well, if that rule was buried in someone's codex, it's not really on the orc player to have the Tau codex memorized.
Right. And that certainly exists in Magic as well. Sometimes you divinate for 3 cards or what have you, and your opponent might not catch it. There's always obviously there's going to be times where one person is perhaps failing to maintain a game state, but the other person drew an incorrect number of cards, and you have to weigh the penalties appropriately, right? So one of these people might be getting a cautionary warning about failing to notice this, but the other person's going to be getting a game loss because of what they've done. So in the end, it comes down to apportioning how much, what kind of infractions have been made by both players, and then assigning the corrective measure to each of them differently.
I have a situation. Let's say you're playing against a super succubus, okay? She goes
Okay.
into like a big unit, somehow manages not to kill it, but she's in base-to-base contact with the model. Okay.
No.
The player controlling the succubus goes, okay, she gets to leave 6 inches and goes and gets into character protection next to 2 raiders, let's just say. Okay. Now, both players might not realize that game state is illegal. Fun fact, that once you're in base-to-base contact, you can't consolidate. You just can't. So even if you can consolidate 6 inches, not towards the nearest enemy, well, you just can't consolidate. The rule says if you're in base-to-base contact, you can't.
You do not consolidate. You are considered to having consolidated.
Yeah, you skip
text.
Yeah, you skip the text. You skip the step of moving. So even if you are allowed to move in any direction, you skip the movement. You're still touching. So Drakari players out there, don't push your super succubi into your opponent's models because you actually can't move out. You have to stay a hair away.
I mean, like a better example would be like like similar situation, but like someone heroic intervened into the succubus, right? Like a Space Wolves 6-inch heroic intervene, killed all the troops, wants to retreat back, but oh no, we're in base contact. The succubus player might not literally know that they cheated, and the Space Wolf player might not know they got cheated. But then all of a sudden you hear about that event coming up later on, and well, for some reason the Space Wolf player took assassinate, and that was the warlord, and now there was 4 points that were lost, and that could have won the game. How do you handle that kind of situation?
So that's everyone gets a slap on the wrist, some sort of warning, but it's too like if it's like the game is done, like it's too far away.
I agree. Do you even give the warning?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I think that would also be an excellent thing to just be like, hey, Magic players, like at the start of the next round, or hey, 40k players, like keep in mind, consolidate and how this works. Because it's not just Super Succubi, right? There's also a couple other Custodian Shield captains on bikes, and there's just a couple warlord traits that you do that fall under it. So that's just like one of those things that you should just like shout out and be like, hey, by the way, keep this in mind.
Yeah, that's a good judging process. The joke of the situation is the FAQ for that situation is actually in the Custodes FAQ, where it says that you can't consolidate if you're in base contact. It explicitly calls it out. If you were to read the rules, it's in there, but like I think with good intentions, you can read the rules and still think that you're allowed to move 6 inches away. Like,
yeah, that one's really hard because like you could convince me that you could read the rules that way and just be like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to move. Fix your stuff, GW. So yeah, the other thing with warnings and yellow cards and red cards and all that stuff is like with a warning that doesn't follow you from tournament to tournament. If you get a warning, I say don't do this thing again, I'm going to yellow card you, and then you don't do it. Like that means you've learned your lesson. Like I'm basically what I'm saying is like I know don't make that mistake. And that's a I know situation because like yeah, it stinks. Like we broke the game state and we may have flipped a win into a loss, but that is such a weird, bizarre rule that like nobody knows. Like I am fully willing to believe that both players just didn't know. Whereas something like Dense, like both players knew and they missed it, and that's a little harder. But
I got a question for you. It's you're going into the tournament. Someone comes up to you and says, "Joe Schmo always cheats on X rule." Right? He's not known for having done this in tournament. He doesn't have a red card, but you know that. And later on in the tournament, Joe Schmo does things that was called out beforehand for being something that was, he often ignores death. Let's just say that. Like he'll try to get away with it once. Okay. How do you handle that? Do you treat that any differently?
No, I don't think you can. But again, this is why Duel with 40k has we're keeping a record of infractions. So Joe Schmo is going to get away with it this one time. And if he goes to another New England 40k event and he tries to get away with it again, we're going to know. Which is sort of the attempt to start a Magic-like record of people trying to get away with stuff. What was that, Burns?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think it's an interesting quandary insofar as that when you're doing these kinds of investigations to find out, like, because it's a possibility of cheating, like, in Magic, you are empowered to discuss this. You're empowered to investigate not only the players but the spectators. So it comes in. So if somebody's yelling, "Joe Schmo did this in round 2" or whatever, like they're allowed to take that into consideration. So it gets really complicated, and there's so I also for those of you who haven't been who didn't watch our last podcast when I was on, there's levels of judges in Magic from L0 to L5, and the higher you get up, the more likely you are to actually involve yourself in these kinds of situations because they're so nuanced and complicated. This is something as I'm myself as an L1, it's very unlikely that I would ever have to involve myself in cheating investigations. And so it's very complicated. It's very nuanced.
All right, I'm going to talk about this next situation. It made me a little sad about the state of 40K judging. I don't blame either of the players involved. I think they made a very reasonable request. And they're big name players. They've been talked about on podcasts before. So it's Alex Fennell and Sean Naden are playing against each other. It's the semifinals. Whoever wins is going to go to the finals. And I talked to them real quick. I'm like, oh, just so you guys know, like, you don't need to start your chess clocks yet because you got a couple extra minutes because the round hasn't started yet. And they're like, cool. And then Sean Naden kind of looks at me and goes, just so you know, we don't really need you to like be here. We'll call you over if we need you. And it's like, you know what? This statement, like, first of all, fair enough. They don't know who I am. They are probably used to playing at events where they know way more than the actual judge does. And they've probably received bad calls from judges in the past that have ruined games they've played at events. They don't really want me at their table because they can probably judge their own game better than I can. And you know what? That's fair. From a 40K perspective, like, that is, as a very high-end player, a thing that I understand why they do that. And I have, in fact, at events, done similar things where I talked about on this podcast where I was arguing with my opponent about rules and like, we should call the judge. And I looked at who the judge was and I was like, no, we shouldn't. They don't. They're gonna get this wrong. And that's awful. And that's not an indictment of them. That's an indictment of the 40K judging system where there isn't one. There's no, like, I have not passed a test. I don't have a badge. I have basically in no way proven myself to them that, like, I know anything what I'm talking about, because they haven't really talked to me because they haven't had rules issues at their tables yet.
The only qualifier is that you talked to the local ITC rep and got a token.
Yeah. Like, I am a good player, but I've never played any of them before. I'm not that good. And they don't know that. And so it's, from their perspective, it is reasonable to be like, please don't mess up our game. From a Magic perspective, if you were playing a game and you're like, judge, go away, you get DQ'd. You can't just be like, don't watch our game. Like, the judge would be like, oh, they're going to do something shady and fix the tournament. And that was just like, that was just a moment where it was just like, I didn't feel bad about it. I was like, yeah, that's reasonable. Like, first of all, it makes my life easier because we were wildly understaffed. So I'm like, oh, cool. I don't need to judge the stream table. I can actually, like, cover the other 45 people I need to cover. From like a high level, like, I would like 40K to be in a place where judging is like, we respect all the judges and expect them to know what they're doing. That was like, oh yeah, we're not even close to that.
Not even close.
Yeah, I mean, for perspective, and this is very much like a chicken and egg problem. Like, you need judges to have infrastructure in place to be respected enough not to have people be like, oh, could you not watch my game? And, like, so basically, it feels like the judging needs to come, like, the good judging needs to come first, and then the respect will come. It's hard to just be like, no, you should just automatically always. It's difficult because, honestly, when you do play these things, they should just automatically be like. I mean, I'm sure they were respectful even when they did tell you to, like, nice. Go away. It is awkward that we are playing a game where it's like that seemed reasonable to do. And I was just going to say, for retrospect, for people that have not watched Magic, if you're at a streaming table, there are typically 2 judges watching each event or each match, every move. There's sometimes even 3 watching everybody's hands at the true high level, a pro level. You have a coterie of judges watching the game. And even for weekly large events, the streaming tables would always have permanently one judge watching every move being made. So it's quite something when somebody's just like, oh, could you, like, not watch my game for me? Like, I understand, and I understand your position as well. It's just it's pretty interesting coming from Magic.
Yeah, and they were very respectful. I believe the phrase "from a place of love" was used in that request. Like they were very, very nice about it, and like I feel bad for them, right? Because they're making this. This is clearly not the first time they've had to make this request of a judge, and that is fair, right? They don't want me making some silly rules mistake that messes up their game because they, first of all, 40K way more complicated than Magic, and it's complicated in a way that you have very specialized knowledge of armies where most judges aren't going to have a specialized knowledge of the armies that are playing that is greater than two experts in those armies. Like I'm very comfortable saying I know just about all the rules and I'm very good at figure interactions. Sean Naden definitely knows things about the Drakari Codex that I don't. That's just a fact. So like it is reasonable that he's like, yeah, I can I please just like know the rules for my codex. And like I am not going to jump in and like be like, you're doing that wrong. Unless I'm asked to, but they don't know that. And that's really hard, right? That's like a really hard place for them to be. So yeah.
What if they did something wrong though?
Yeah, I mean, I would say something, but like I don't think they would. So like it's not really an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just brings up like the idea of like nobody's infallible. You know, like it's Sean Naden playing Eldari, but like, you know, he can make a mistake.
Yeah,
that's fair.
And also that kind of attitude will lead to situations where they're like, well, we don't need to call a judge. We can like figure it out amongst ourselves. We can come up with like an equitable solution here. When that is just like not okay in terms of, I mean, I should say it's not okay in 40K either, to be perfectly honest, but it's certainly not allowed in Magic the Gathering. Like if a problem has happened, you throw your hand up, you get a judge to figure it out. You never try and arbitrate things by yourself.
Yep, I did have to snap at a couple tables about that where they were like trying to fix a game state. Like, absolutely not. I already said this. Like that was part of my player announcement. Like, do not fix your games. Like, someone screws up, you call me over. And you know, people still try to talk out games. People still try to fix game states, and I had to tell them like, you can't do that. You can't talk out games. You can't fix. And I had to correct people on it. Because it's just a very different attitude in the 40K community where like the judge says something, but if they're not at their table, they don't really exist. Whereas like in Magic, if the judge says something and then you go against it, you're going to get DQ'd, and you're not just going to get like DQ'd from that tournament. You're going to get like a mark on your record, and you get too many of those, you're going to not be able to play in any tournament ever, anywhere. And like, that's like a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The idea of that is just wild to me.
Yeah. I mean, it really grows from a place of GW love, right? Because like they posted, I was looking at the 7th edition rulebook today, and even there they were like, okay, you know, if you guys come to a decision you can't make, roll a die, and on a 1-3, it's your decision, and on a 4-6, it's your opponent's decision. So like it's very different, like sort of roots and where they're coming from on resolving things.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, this game was designed as like a casual hobby experience, not a competitive like event game, and that's just a very different rule set. So the rule set is sweet. The game's awesome. The sort of like meta rule set, the rules of like how do you enforce the rules, is basically non-existent. I was fortunate enough to know one of the most prominent judges in the area, and I don't know if you know this, Burns, but a lot of your comments had a significant impact on the writing of the rules enforcement doc for New England 40K, which I think is awesome. So, but you know, it's still small. It's still like it's a circuit of a couple tournaments. There's only like 4 or 5 different regular events that actually like report into the document of like these are the rules and fractions we're tracking. And you know, that's fine. It's good. It's a great start. It's better than nothing, but it's not nearly big enough to be, you know, systemic and really change what the face of like competitive 40K rules enforcement looks like.
So, oh yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
How long has that document been existing at this point?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
How long have you been tracking warnings? I will say.
So I have not been a judge of any sort of New England 40K event. So I was I've only submitted one sheet to it. I don't know when it started. That's a question that we'll have to ask the New England 40K sort of judge organizer, who's Carol.
Gotcha. Do you know what kind of effort she's going into to trying to like expand that beyond New England?
I don't know. I don't know if what the plan is, and that's part of the problem, right? Is like it's not just like New England's got like a system going on, but then like California's got their own system, and then the Midwest has their own system, and it's just like it's not one unified system because GW doesn't want to be in charge of rules enforcement agency. They want to just like make models and make cool rules, which in some ways is fine, but in other ways, it's rough. And part of that too, I think, is that a lot of GW sales are like competitive 40K. I don't think drives a significant portion of GW sales, so they just don't feel a need to put a lot of effort in it, which as a company, fair enough.
Well, I heard those arguments for the longest time with Magic. For the longest time, the casual events always were the ones where like 70% of the product was sold from. It's all casual. It's like, but turns out that like even with that casual, you want a tournament structure. You want people to like know that there are events that they can show up to, because like turns out that like if your game doesn't have events that people can think they can show up to, even if they never will, it still will sell product. Like I've seen game stores where it's just like, oh yeah, we have, when they're like talking about selling a product, like getting someone into a game, it's like, oh yeah, we have a usual Friday Night Magic, and that like really sells it. Or we play that board game on Thursdays, sells the product. If you don't have like even the type of event, even if the person's not going to show up, it is so important to your game. Is the 8th edition being a more competitive edition is the reason why GW stock boomed, and they'd be foolish to not continue to invest in it. Foolish. I don't know if I'm going too big there.
You're
So I
not,
think
but
part of
GW
the
is
issue,
often foolish. So
I think part of the issue there, though, is that there are events people can show up to. Just show up to a New England 40K event, right? Like GW doesn't have to organize these things. These things already exist. And yeah, they're not perfect. They're not like this one big unified system, but they exist.
Yeah, but okay, so the problem we're having right now, 8th edition had some balance issues from time to time, but for the most part, you could see that they were trying to like make competitive like was reasonable. That is how we got like 3 Iron Hands FAQ nerfs, right? Like we look at it now, and we look at like Drakari, what, 5 months now being in the 65 plus percent win rate. Yeah, they got 1 nerf. 1. That's it. Vect, I blame you. It doesn't feel like 9th edition they've been doing the effort they were doing in 8th edition. And I think it's going to net cause harm for their brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
probably will.
Yeah, we'll have to see as we move on. So Ben, just to go back a little like to bring it back in a little bit about tournament or like being a judge, and I just have a couple questions for you if you could briefly go for it.
Sure.
So this is something that I certainly had interesting interactions with in Magic. The sort of line between TO and judge, whereas you as a judge are there to be the advocate for fair play, while the TO is kind of there to be an advocate for the players. And sometimes those things don't necessarily mesh well.
Yep.
Speaking on that, how would you say about your TO for this event, and how do you feel about them?
Well, Ed, if you're listening, it was awful. No, Ed was great. I played there for their 40K team now. I betrayed the Great Crusade. I play for Battle for Salvation now. I thought it was great. The event was well run. It was the venue they got was awesome. The train they got was great. There were some issues with BCP, but my understanding of talking to other people who have run majors is that there are always issues with BCP. So it is what it is. There were a couple times when they disagreed with my rulings, but they never said you can't do that. And I think that is healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a great mark for events being held that location. Really, when the TOs are smart enough to be able to take a backseat and tell the judge that they are empowered to do what needs to be done to promote fair play, I think that's like a great sign for a game store.
Yeah, it wasn't a game store; it's a gaming club.
My apologies.
No, it's all good. Yeah, BFS is a gaming club, and they run a. Yeah, no. So yeah, and I think that's like the perfect thing. You'd be like, all right, I don't know if this is positive experience to the players, or for whatever reason they disagree with the grueling. but you're the head judge, so sure. And that only happened like 2 times because most of the things I was answering were like, can sisters get out of a rhino and then shoot at no? And that's no one's losing sleep over that one. It was in their rules packet. They can't.
All right.
But yeah, it was great.
Good.
Next question.
So now that you've gone sort of through your crucible of fire here into fully fledged head judgedom, looking back, would you have changed your approach for anything? Would you have done anything different? Looking back on it now.
So if I had known that I was going to be the head judge, before the morning of the event, a couple things I would have done. I would have told them to forward me either. So if it was weeks in advance, and she'd be like, "Hey, I'm in charge of model conversions. Just send them all to me." And then I probably would have just amended my before the game start, the before event starts speech a little bit more. Read the tournament packet, just pause, read it right now. There's things in there that are important. Airplanes, just keep the wings on the table. Hopefully by the next time I run a major, airplanes won't be a menace and I won't have to be yelling at as many people about them. But just a couple things I would have added to my pre-tournament speech. And I don't think that, and I might have gone over the actual penalty system for this, because it was in the tournament packet that we're going to use doing the 40K rules enforcement. But that's all right, it's in the packet that we're going to use that, and then you have to go look up what that is, and I should just all right, this is how rules are enforced, and these.
Nice.
Would you have set up backup judges?
Backup judges? I mean, yeah, right. I had other people in the room who were helpful, but they were not necessarily as knowledgeable about the game as I was. They were certainly able to answer simpler questions oh, is this line of sight? Can you check line of sight for me? Or what can you or can't you command your role? But they may not have been able to do how do Cabal points work. So yeah, that's
okay. All right. So I've got 2 more.
Oh, okay.
One is, do you, having done all that, do you want to head judge again? Are you excited to kind of continue in this space, or are you more interested in being a player?
Oh, I'd head judge again. It was a lot of fun. Oh yeah, for sure. Yep.
And then the final one, and this kind of ties into our podcast here. What advice would you give players going into competitive tournaments now that you're now that you've kind of been on the other side? What are your top things? Do this, do this, do this.
Read the tournament packet. If anybody has ever called a judge on you for a rule in your book, email the TO about that rule. The other judge might have ruled it correctly. This one might not, and you want to be prepared for getting hit with the wrong ruling halfway through the tournament. If you play sisters, email them no matter what. Your book needs an FAQ, and it does not have one. If you play orcs, email them no matter what. Your book needs an FAQ, and it does not have one. Can Argent Shroud walk out of a rhino and shoot at no penalty is a question that there is actually no answer to. And different TOs will rule it differently. There's not a right answer. There's not a wrong answer. But you're going to want to know, for list construction, you're all right, am I outflanking all my retributors, or am I putting them in rhinos? How does it work? If you're... Yeah. Yeah, if you are going to bring anything that is converted, please get it approved. No matter what. If you are altering the silhouette of your model in any way, get it approved. I think that those are the big ones. Read the packet, email them if you play orcs, email them if you play sisters, email them about weird rules in your codex, especially if you're playing a 9th edition codex. Make sure you know what the terrain's going to look like. This is from more a competitive standpoint, you're looking to win. Really read through the terrain packets. Make sure you are familiar with the keywords and different terrain pieces and how they're going to be ruled. There was more dense terrain on the tables than it looked like from a top-down view. If you read the thing on the side that tells you what everything was, it would tell you a couple other pieces were dense. This got a lot of people who were oh, I was relying on more indirect fire than I really could have because I didn't realize that the lanes were so narrow. Or and it's well, yeah, I know it's too late. It's too late. We're on turn 2, you can't move your swig buggies over there, but yeah, they're shooting through dents from where you put them now. So you're hitting on 5s. Good luck. Yeah, I think those are the big ones.
Great.
If someone shows up to you and says like, "Hey, at this GW tournament, they said my Bellacore models could be both Space Marines and Demons in the same detachment, and they have proof in a GW tournament it was ruled that way," how would you react?
Did you email me about it?
Yes.
Like they just show up with that list and they didn't talk to me about it, or did they?
Oh, they
email me
emailed you
beforehand?
about it. They emailed you about it. For those of you who aren't in the know, we've had GW tournaments that have disagreed with their own FAQs.
Yeah, GW has just straight up said that their own FAQ is wrong, which is.
Makes
I
your brain
personally
hurt.
am of the opinion that it should have always worked that way. So if I was full on in charge, because that was the other thing with this event, I wasn't full on in charge. Because I got put in charge the day before. I wasn't going to be unfair to players and change rulings. So literally, like, if you got a ruling from the TO and you show me an email about that ruling, like, cool. And if you don't have the email, I will go to the BFS guys and they'll pull it up. Because I don't want to be unfair to you and just be like, surprised, I'm going to change the rules after you agreed with it with someone else. So yeah, that's like the big thing is like, I want to be the person receiving the emails about like weird rules questions so that I can just be like, I know what I've said, I know who I've said it to, and if someone does something weird and like, oh well, the last TO let me have it, let me do it. It's like, well, I'm a different TO. Or yeah, you emailed me, you're good. Carry on with Bellacore and your Psyker and your Chaos Space Marine Sorcerer in the same detachment. That's fine.
Let's say you weren't, so that's saying you kind of slid by the answering the question. Let's say it is 2 weeks before you are the head judge. They talk about that GW tournament where they say you can do them both in the same detachment. Do you let them?
Yeah,
even though the FAQs. Okay.
Yeah. So I generally went strict read as written. But if it's something that's like kind of like weird or up for interpretation like that, and you ask me about it beforehand, yeah, I in fact, not only would I'd say yes, but I would also put it in the tournament. Heads up, everyone! This rule's weird. We're allowing this. Don't be surprised when you see it. No one would read it, and then they complain to me later. But like it would be there, so I could point at it and be like, "Read the packet."
Read the packet. What if the GW app says my last cannon strength 10?
You're just taking a piss now.
The GW packet, like don't build lists with the GW packet. I don't know what you want. You can't even take a cult in the GW app. So like your Thousand Suns models are terrible. Also, your Rubik Marines have too many bolters.
Too many what?
The GW app is a nightmare with Thousand Suns. It doesn't work. Don't worry about it.
It's the official place for rules.
If
How
you
many
attempt,
bolters do my Rubik Marines get to have?
0. They have Inferno Combi or Inferno Bolters, but don't worry about it. Any other questions you guys have before we start looking to sign off?
I don't got anything.
No, I think we're pretty comprehensive. I'd be curious to see what your gameplay. I'm curious about what your pre-game meeting looks like and how it like lines up with other people's pre-game meetings. But that might be evolving past the scope of this particular podcast, or this particular meeting.
That's fair. All right. So I think that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for joining us, Burns. I certainly had a lot of fun running BFS. Well, not running it, judging it. Ed and his team ran it, which was also kind of nice that I just got to be full on, like, I'm in charge of rules and I have no other responsibilities. And that made my life a lot easier, not having also being pulled to like running BCP and getting tables set up and rearranging terrain. Like I was just like, I get to be like in charge of rules, and that was sweet. So with that, Chris, you want to take us out?
Yeah. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to our viewers. We're live every night. Not every night, every Monday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Gonna upload this VOD on YouTube, where you can like, subscribe, ring a bell, do a bunch of other things. Very soon. But until then, thank you again to my contributors, Kevin Lieb, Benjamin Rubenstein, Michael Burns. This has been the 3D6 Charge podcast. Bye for now, and roll any ones.